Eighth Amendment means abortion is illegal in Ireland with the exception of if the life of the mother is at risk. The Master of Holles Street, Dr. Rona Mahoney, joins us along with solicitor and mother Liz McDermott, and lots of people with plenty of different views. But first, here's a look at some of the major moments of the abortion debate over the years.
The pro-life amendment. How should it be worded? How should you vote? The case for and against.
The Catholic Church launched into the campaign looking for a yes vote. Opponents argued for the separation of church and state law.
The country has voted yes, and tidily so, by a ratio of exactly 2-to-1 in favour of the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution.
And many people here are certain in their minds what the issue is all about. One.
Today, an investigation into the death of a pregnant woman in a Galway hospital.
We were insisting or requested so many times for termination, and we were not given.
We've seen a really shrill, hysterical outbursts from abortion campaigners who have sought to use this tragedy in order to further their own agenda.
A new citizens' assembly is also being established by the government to examine the Eighth Amendment.
I think we can do better here in Ireland. I think it's time to give women a say on their own reproductive rights.
So that brings us right up to date. Lucy, I want to come to you first. You had an abortion last year.
I did, yeah.
Tell us about the circumstances around that and how you came to that decision.
So last year I fell pregnant in, I think it was about May. It was completely unplanned, and I spent about 2 weeks thinking about whether or not I could raise a baby and be a mother. And I came to the decision after much thought that I was not prepared or ready to be a mother, and decided that the best option for me and the best choice that I could make would be to have an abortion. Unfortunately, because of the Eighth Amendment, I couldn't have one in Ireland, so I had to stay pregnant for 5 weeks and wake up every day knowing that I was pregnant before I could travel over to England and have an abortion. And then I didn't talk about it for about 6 or 7 months afterwards because I was so afraid of people finding out what I'd done and what I'd gone through, and I was afraid of being judged because of the stigma that surrounds it in Ireland, because it's not an issue that's been talked about. It's not something that women are sort of given the freedom to talk about, I think. So I stayed silent with it and dealt with it in my own head, and was kind of left floundering with not knowing what to do with this information.
And obviously you've changed your view on talking about it because tonight you're being very public about it. Why?
Absolutely. Well, if you'd said to me a year ago that I'd be up talking about it, I would have probably just laughed or cried or something. But because of this, I'm wearing the Repeal jumper, the Repeal Project jumper, which Anna here has started. And when I kept seeing people walking down the street with repeal written across their chest, it was complete strangers, and I just felt this overwhelming sense of solidarity and of people that I didn't know saying, I support you, and I support your right to choose, and I support the decisions that you've made, however hard or easy it was, that you can talk about this, and we should talk about it, and we need to get talking about a referendum.
OK. Mary, who's sitting over here, Mary, where you also faced a situation where you had a crisis pregnancy about 2.5 years ago, am I right?
Nearly 3 years ago.
And you took a different decision.
Yeah. I fell pregnant in my second year of college at the University of Limerick, and I wasn't prepared at all. I found out I was pregnant and my first thought was abortion. You know, it was the first thing that came into my head. And I thought about it. I was nowhere near ready to be a mother. You know, everyone that knew me knew that I didn't want kids, I didn't want to get married, the whole lot. And I really do think that if the 8th Amendment hadn't been in place, if I just had to drive 15 minutes in the road to, you know, a hospital to end the life of my baby, as in the name of choice, that my life would be very different. But now I have a 2.5-year-old little girl, you know, and she wasn't a choice, like she's a person.
So that seems to suggest that morally you didn't have a problem with abortion, because if the clinic had been nearby and if had it been legal,
no, well, I thought about it in the sense of that no one thinks rationally in a situation where it's unplanned, where you're in college. What am I going to do? How am I going to manage it? What supports do I have? That kind of thing. I thought of it like that. But I'm so glad that it was. I'm not saying I would have done it, but I'm saying that the outcome could have been different if it was so laid on for me.
But you feel that the supports were there that allowed you to make the choice that you did?
Yeah.
Donal Lynch is with us. Donal, you've been writing about this as a journalist. What's your view on what you've heard so far?
Well, I think I would be very, very pro-choice. I think there should be abortion on demand in this country. But I worry about the pro-choice movement. It's achieved so little. It's been 24 years since X. I think when you hear narratives of abortion come out and women talking about their own experience, what's absent from that really is any kind of talk of the fetus or of the ending of a life. And I think that those are the arguments that are going to come up on the pro-life side. And until the pro-choice lobby engages with that and talks about the fact that a life does end and that a heartbeat is stopped, they won't convince the middle ground.
So the pro-choice, you're saying, don't acknowledge that side of abortion, where a life is ended. Am I understanding you properly?
The pro-choice side doesn't talk about the fetus, the love affair of the fetus. You know, they talk only about the experience of the woman, and until they can talk about both sides of it, I think they will have trouble convincing the middle ground. Well,
Anna Cosgrave, you were mentioned earlier on when we first started speaking to Lucy, but do you understand that? Do you think there's a truth in that the beating heart of the fetus, as Donal says, is not acknowledged?
I suppose when I'm hearing this, what I don't think that he's ever listening to, I wish I could bring them with me, but there's 180,000 women in Ireland who've been failed by the state that made the decision of their own accord to travel abroad, and regardless of the 8th Amendment being in place or not, this is actually going to happen. So what I'm primarily doing with Repeal Project is I want to just open up a factual, logical, honest and kind conversation, as I wasn't hearing or seeing these stories that now are kind of coming forward, and really it's only just stories and statistics that are going to really open people's minds. And yes, maybe I'm not talking about a beating heart, but either the other side actually talking about the lived experiences of Irish women like Lucy, who this has affected.
Donal, do you want to come back
there? Sorry, Claire, just to say they are, in fact, that will be, you know, a mainstay of the debate on the pro-life side. They will talk about the fetus and the beating heart and all of that. I think if you look at, like, for instance, say, the debate around assisted suicide and end of life, there's a lot of people who could embrace the grey areas there and get themselves morally to a point where they could agree with the idea of that. But they don't do that by denying the humanity of the person who's about to die. And the problem with the debate in this country is that the humanity of the fetus is denied even by people who want abortion on demand, like myself.
OK, Cora Sherlock is here as well. You're welcome, Cora. So what we're hearing tonight is that this is happening anyway, that people are making this choice. They're making it in an unsupported way, and that they haven't had a voice up until now. And that's why these women have come out to tell their stories. Do you see any, can you have any compassion for those people when you hear that, even though you're on the opposite side of the debate?
I don't think that the pro-life side is the opposite to compassion. I think the very opposite. The pro-life side has compassion for both lives, mother and baby. I think in your VT, though, Claire, it shows really the problem with the debate in Ireland, because when you're talking about things like the UN, which is pushing abortion in this country, it completely ignores the fact that, for example, around the world, babies are born alive after failed abortions and left to die. The UN has never addressed that human rights aberration. It's never addressed the fact, like Anna talks about statistics,
I really want to see a debate focusing on statistics. For example, the statistic that 90% of babies diagnosed with Down syndrome in England and Wales are aborted. That's something that when you say to people who are wearing a Repeal the 8th jumper, very often they've never heard that before. And that is something that we are responsible for in this country, because we are closing that off from the debate. Also in England and Wales, 1 in 5 babies, 1 in 5 pregnancies ends in abortion. So that whole idea that we're hearing, that slogan, Repeal the 8th, what is behind that slogan? Again, on the VT, we didn't see anything of the hundreds of thousands of lives in Ireland that have been saved by the 8th Amendment, because there are very few laws in this country that we can say have saved lives, but the 8th Amendment is one of them. You did mention Miss C in the VT. She had an abortion. She was taken to England for an abortion in 1997, but she came back afterwards and said that she deeply regretted her abortion. And what I would like to see in this country is groups like the National Women's Council of Ireland. I don't know if any of them are here this evening, but Bernadette Goulding is here from the Women's Abortion Recovery Group, Women Hurt, and the National Women's Council of Ireland did not give them a platform to speak. I think that women like Bernadette should be given a platform to speak on this very sensitive issue.
And Bernadette, I will come to you, but Anne, I know you wanted to come back in on something you heard Cora say there.
I just thought, when we're talking about kindness and compassion, what about the women in Ireland that are discriminated against, that this issue really, really deeply affects? What about working class women who actually don't even have the option to travel because they don't have the finances to do so? What about the migrant women of Ireland who are also in that position, in that they don't actually have hands on a passport? And all I'm really trying to do is just to give more voices a chance to come forward, because I've certainly seen Cora over the years multiple times on many panels. So this is Lucy's first time, and I hope there's loads more people that will be able or feel the need to come forward. And on that point, women shouldn't even have to share their story, because it's such a deeply personal thing to have to go through.
I just want to, in reference to what Cora said about women that regret their abortions, that's very, very rarely the case. And anyone I've ever spoken to that is, because since I've shared my story, spoken to so many women who have got in contact and just said thank you for talking about it. The only regret or guilt that I felt after having an abortion was the guilt that I expected to feel regret. I expected to feel guilty, because it's what society, I've been conditioned. I feel like it almost been like it'd been put upon me that I should feel guilty, I should feel regret. And the only guilt I felt was for not feeling guilty, for feeling relieved.
Bernadette?
You know, you mentioned there that you didn't think there were many women who had regret after their abortions. I have to say there are hundreds of women, and indeed thousands of women all over the world. I had an abortion myself, and at the time I felt I suppose I had no other choice. There was nobody offering me any other choice or any other, it was all pointed in the direction of abortion. So I exercised my right to choose, and I deeply regret that decision. I suffered for many years from depression, anxiety, self-hatred, low self-esteem. But some years ago I decided to speak out about my abortion experience, and I've spoken in many countries, including the Lebanon, Korea, Hungary. I'm just back from Cape Town in South Africa. And it's no different in any of those countries. Abortion is readily available next door. The clinic might be maybe 10 metres away from the house. And the women have the same story, the same regret, the same shame. And it's not because we're Irish and that, this is such a big secret, it's not debated.
But Bernadette, is it not a very individual and subjective thing? Some women might really regret it, some women might not regret it at all.
But absolutely, and I agree with that. There are many women, obviously, that don't regret their abortions, but I wouldn't meet those women, because I only meet the women who regret their decision, and I meet hundreds of them in my work in abortion recovery.
Okay, and Laura Kennedy's here as well, from the Irish Times. You believe that all of this is intrinsically linked to religion. Is that your view?
Absolutely. It's really interesting. I wrote an article recently for the Irish Times that encountered the 3 primary defences that you will get on the pro-life side, and we've heard all of them tonight. But the purpose of the article was really to show that if we could magically create a world where none of these 3 problems were relevant, abortion causing regret and distress, the issue of Down syndrome, etc.
What do you say to that, though?
Well,
we're perhaps looking at a situation where Down syndrome and other things that we might not like cleft palates, will just be eradicated because we open the door to abortion on demand if we remove or change the 8th Amendment.
Well, firstly, we don't. That's a slippery slope argument. We don't necessarily open the door to abortion on demand. But the point of the article was to point out that if we could magically remove all of those issues, the majority of pro-life campaigners would still be pro-life because those are not the reasons why they're pro-life. The reasons why they're pro-life are intrinsic to Irish society, and they are rooted in the Western Christian philosophy that, you know, dictates the environment that we live in, and that is the idea that life begins at conception and is sacred, and for that reason that justification allows people on the pro-life side to equate the fully actualised biologically independent life of a woman with that of a fetus, and I think there lies the problem.
You know, it's interesting that the only person to bring up religion this evening is a pro-choice campaigner, and that is my experience constantly. I debate this issue all of the time. I don't bring up religion. It's not a religious issue for me. It's a human rights argument. And the point is that abortion is life-ending. It is not life-saving. The medical profession in this country is world leaders. I'm very confident about the medical profession as a woman. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be sitting here, but that is the reality of it. And I would also like to go back, Claire, and make that point again about the National Women's Council of Ireland, when Bernadette very courageously...
Okay, they're not here, so I can't...
No, but it is an important
But there's no point in
point.
talking about somebody, Cora, who's not here, because I can't put that to them. It puts me in an unfair position.
This is on
Laura,
the
do you want to
record.
respond to
They
what...
have said
I can't take that... You've made the point already.
Yes, I think it's quite important to... That's exactly the point I'm making. This is a religious issue. And people who make the argument either covertly or overtly, we are all influenced by Catholicism in this country. The morality that dictates our society is Catholic in nature. So,
but Cora's just said it's not a religious issue.
But it doesn't work in a secular forum to make the argument that my religion or my moral beliefs, which are based upon religion, whether I realise it or not, dictate that abortion is morally wrong, and therefore you cannot have an abortion. Therefore, people who hold these beliefs necessarily must build upon that foundation more seemingly pragmatic reasons to defend their position.
But it is a human rights fact. Nobody in this room has the right to say that anybody else should not be allowed to be alive. That is the reality. It doesn't matter whether you have a religion or whether you have no religion. And there are plenty of secular pro-lifers throughout the world who are making that argument. This is really something to sidestep that fact. You know, people who focus on religion don't want to talk about the reality of abortion and the devastation that it causes to women and babies throughout the world. For example, Denmark has set itself a goal by 2030 to be Down syndrome free. There was a report in a newspaper in the UK just the other day, this week, to say that the number of babies aborted because of cleft palate has tripled in the last 5 years.
Okay, I am going to come back to the audience, but we do have two panel members here that I want to talk to, Dr. Rona Mahoney and Liz McDermott. Rona, I'll come to you first. I mean, when you hear that you know, this starts us off on a slippery slope, eradicating Down syndrome, then you're looking at cleft palate and things like that. Do you understand that when you hear that coming from Cora?
I think really when it comes to the medical context and we look at the 8th Amendment, I think there are three issues. It's not just fetal anomaly. There are three main issues, I think, that need to be examined purely in the medical context. And the first really is the idea that the 8th Amendment, you know, asks us to reduce or presumes that we can translate a series of rights into clinical risk. And of course, when we look at substantial risk to life, you know, we have always this difficulty in defining what is a substantial risk to life. Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 50%? When does a serious medical disorder become a substantial risk to life? And where does a woman's view come into this in terms of her life? Remember, prior to fetal viability, if a mother dies, her baby dies too. The second issue, again, is addressing the whole area then of fetal anomaly. And we know there are fetal anomalies that are really consistent with very short life outside the womb. So anencephaly, renal agenesis, and chromosome anomalies like Edwards and Patau syndrome. And yes, there are very rare individual case reports of survival for longer than a few days, for a few weeks, but they're really rare, and they're so rare they form, you know, case reports in international literature. But in that context, my experience directly of dealing with patients is that some patients will choose to continue the pregnancy, and you know, if their baby survives a minute, 3 minutes, an hour, that time is so incredibly valuable, and they will say to me that they were very pleased with that decision, and the time they had their baby was hugely important, and I totally respect that. But there are other women who will find that is a road that is just too difficult to navigate and too distressing, and in that context, these women will choose to opt not to continue the pregnancy.
So do you believe that both of those women, that you outlined two examples there, that they should have the right to choose?
See, I really understand that they will choose a different way. The difference at the moment is, and I suppose the issue at the moment is, that in one sense, someone who chooses to continue their pregnancy, the state will care for them and hospitals will care for them and they will have care at home close to their family. For women who travel in that context, they're travelling to a different jurisdiction and they are not able to be referred appropriately, so therefore they are often making their own arrangements in the context of a complex, medical disorder. And I think we also have to remember the criminalisation, really complex clinical decisions in relation to risk to life. And in relation to this issue, they are made in a criminal context, and that really increases the stigma and the sense of abandonment. And women will say to me at times they feel absolutely abandoned by the state in this context.
So you seem to be, I'm translating what you're saying, you seem to be saying that in cases of fatal fetal abnormalities that women should have the right to choose.
This is where the Eighth Amendment really gives us difficulty. And the third area where the Eighth Amendment, I think, gives us particular difficulty is in the case we saw coming before the High Court, really, where we saw its ability to distort medical decision-making in a very serious way. And in 2014, we saw the case of a woman who was dead and in whom the organs were maintained in order for her to incubate her fetus. Even though the overwhelming medical opinion was that there were so many weeks before this fetus would reach viability that this was really, as the High Court described it, futile. Other people at the time described that as a macabre experiment, and it really was. But I think if that happens in your country, then you really have to examine why that happened and could that happen again.
Okay.
So in those three areas, for me, I think the Eighth Amendment causes clinicians difficulty in making sound clinical decisions, and our aim is always to protect women, to protect life, and to give women sound medical care. And it is not really very appropriate that we are making really complex medical decisions in the context of a criminal offence.
Liz, your response to that?
Well, I understand Rona's difficulty, and I wish it was my experience that I was supported by medical professionals in making a decision to continue a pregnancy, which was a difficult case. I was told that my baby, at a 20-week scan, that my baby didn't have any legs or much in the way of arms, and that he would never do anything but lie in a bed. So at the time I felt that that was actually a more difficult station to run, and a vista stretching ahead than a baby who was going to die shortly after birth or at birth. I experienced a clinical kind of deep freeze settling, shall we say, all around me. I didn't feel supported, or when I said, no, I'm keeping this baby, even though that was the most frightening thing I've heard myself saying, I didn't know how I was going to cope, but I just felt, I've seen my baby on a scan, I've seen his face, I can see who he looks like, and I want to continue with this. But medically, I wasn't supported in that.
Okay, so that was your decision, Liz, to go ahead with your pregnancy. But Dr. Mahoney is telling us about women who can't do that, who can't go through with that, or who decide that they are not capable of going through with that pregnancy where they've had a diagnosis and they know that that child is not going to live. Should that woman not have the right to choose what she does?
Well, it's not a question of should she have the right to choose what she does. I think we have to remember what she's choosing to do. That baby exists and is alive, and I think Donal made that point very strongly, that we have to recognise the humanity of the other life that the doctor has as a patient, recognising the judgment calls that you have to make, Rona, but that life must be also valued and helped. And perhaps women, and I understand how frightened they feel, how unable they might feel to continue, but with the appropriate supports, and this is what we're calling for in One Day More, that there's a better option for women in that difficult situation. That why can't we provide them with a pathway for medical care and support, to help them, to counsel them, to supply bereavement support. And
do we not do that, though?
We don't. Perinatal hospice care is not. Nobody has heard of it. It's not talked about.
Do you believe that life begins at conception?
Scientifically, that's settled science. Human life does begin at conception.
I mean, people get into all kinds of ethical debates, but I think the point here really is what are the outcomes that parents are facing and what are the actual real-life clinical situations that parents are facing, you know, and there are a series of conditions where the overwhelming body of evidence tells us that these babies will not survive for long after birth. When I say that, I mean they will survive for hours or days, and that is the context. And parents have to sit down and digest this awful information, and it's not a question.
And that's
the
why they
point
need
is
support.
At the moment, and we do give support, and the idea that we've never given support, and I'm sorry that I know your experience has been very difficult, Liz, and I appreciate that it's been difficult, but I think you will find people who have felt supported and who are very pleased that they've continued their pregnancy.
We need to take a quick break, but we'll come back to this after this. See you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to the programme. Now, we'll be continuing our discussion with Liz and Mona in just a moment, but I want to bring some more audience voices into our conversation. Arlette, where are you sitting? Arlette, you have your own story, a very personal story. Just tell us very briefly, because we don't have much time.
Yeah, no problem. 4 years ago, myself and my husband were expecting our third baby. We had a 5- and 8-year-old, 2 boys. And we found out at 12 weeks that the baby had Patau's syndrome and a large cystic hygroma. So we made the horrendous choice to travel over to Liverpool to have a termination. My mum and dad came with us at the time, and my husband, and it was definitely the right thing for us to do at the time. And since then, I've actually gone on to have another little girl called Freya, who was born with a cleft palate. She was born with Pierre-Robin sequence, hole in her heart, hip dysplasia. Like, she's gorgeous, she's great, but she had special needs. What our other baby had was a fatal abnormality, and there was a huge difference.
What do you say when you hear Liz, and I think Cora might have said it earlier, or Bernadette, that it's not up to you to make that decision, that you don't have that right? That's their belief.
Okay, well, it's more my right to decide what's best for my baby, who I really wanted, my husband really wanted. We loved our baby. We totally respect people like Liz that continue with their pregnancies. They need the support. We all need the support. But as I said, it's under 3% of women that regret their abortions, under 3%. I am totally at peace with the decision I made. And I believe it was myself and my husband, it was our baby that we loved and wanted. And I don't believe that Cora or Liz loved my baby or any more than I did, and it was up to us to make that decision.
Cleona, who's behind you, Arlette, you had a similar situation but made a different choice.
Yes, so our little baby John Paul was diagnosed as having anencephaly at our 22-week scan. And so, I feel very strongly that it's because of the 8th Amendment that his life was protected. When you're given that kind of news, I don't think there's two types of women who can face this and women who can't face this. I think the idea that your child is inevitably going to die is just impossible for any woman to face. And so it takes time for the reality of that to sink in, and it takes time for you to adjust to it. And I suppose because of the situation for us, and because of the care we were offered, we were fortunate that we were offered that the hospital would care for us and our baby for as long as we needed, that we had that incredible experience of getting to know this little boy and of our family all getting to spend time with him. And he is now a little boy that we celebrate. Every year on his birthday we celebrate, and that's an extraordinary experience for us. And I suppose I fear that that in future, future families like us will be denied that, that opportunity that we've had.
I just want to come to Alison Cowser, who people will know, of course, from Dragon's Den. Alison, you have strong views on this, am I right?
I have strong views on most things, but I suppose the reason I'm here today is what we're talking about here tonight are really personal stories, and every single one of them has its merit. But for me, as a society in Ireland, we seem to be happy to ignore the fact that 3,500 women travel to the UK to deal with their issues every single year, and the 180,000 that have done so since the early 1980s. So at some point we're going to have to face this as a society and deal with those issues on an individual basis, which is something that as a country we have not been able to do so far.
Okay, we asked our Claire Byrne Live and Morrick Smartphone panel, do you want to see a referendum on abortion? The results were yes 66%, no 22%, and 12% don't know. When you see that, Liz, do you think that the 66% there are saying they want to change it, or they just want to be asked the question?
I think the 66% don't really know enough about the issue. There hasn't been enough discussion about it. We've had some tonight, which is good to have an open debate about it. But, you know, we can hear Rona's story in very narrow terms, that she's talking about a particular small group of people, and a lot of people would fall into the view of thinking, well, babies who are not going to live for very long, well, what's the difference? What's the harm? It is better for everybody to just get the delivery, get the baby, you know, delivered and move on with your life. But that's not what we're talking about. We've heard women here talking about just going to England because they just didn't want to be pregnant. And I think culturally that's something we, in Ireland, it doesn't sit well with us. And that's why we've had the 8th Amendment for so long. And it was voted actively in. And we've voted to retain it. So the 66% who want it, I think, is a false, you know, if the
well, they want a
fairer
referendum.
debate.
We don't know how they would vote
well,
in
let's
that
hope
referendum.
that they hear the whole story of abortion, what abortion
Rona, can I just ask you,
does.
before we finish, your view on the story today that the Times Online said that they discovered that advice was being given to women who were considering their options in pregnancy about abortion, that they were at higher risk of breast cancer, that they may abuse their children. What was your view on that?
I think there was a range of advices given that was poor advice, not backed up by any medical evidence. And I think the difficulty there is that, in fact, the advice was so off the wall, really, that you had to assume that it was agenda-driven. And that's a very difficult thing. I think when we're counselling people in relation to medical outcome, we have to be very careful.
But we've heard allegations on both sides of the debate, on the pro-choice and the pro-life.
Does not cause breast cancer. There was a list of things that were listed there that it just simply doesn't cause. You know, and when we talk about the amendment, to say that we haven't had a debate on it, since this amendment was brought in 1983, we've had several additional referenda. We've had multiple debates on this. The reality of it is we have a constitution that protects women, even in the context of something as distressing as a fetal anomaly where a baby will not survive after birth. We have a constitution that protects women to travel to a different jurisdiction. And we have significant medical risk caused by people making very difficult and complex medical decisions in a criminal context.
OK, we have to leave it there. Thank you both very much, and I'm sure we'll be returning to that subject again. That's all we've time for tonight. Until next week, thanks for watching and a very good night to you. Thank you.